Hello everyone and welcome to this driver installation video of my machine Warp. I always find these kinds of videos interesting to watch because it's a really relaxing kind of slow content, and I always find it interesting to see how the different driver installers behave and which drivers they need. So I figured because this machine has a particularly interesting set of drivers that I picked out for it, I'd show it with you. So let's start by looking at what Windows XP ships with by default. This installation has just been installed. I haven't installed anything manually yet. So naturally, the standard things you'd expect are there. It detects my flash drive. It detects only one of the hard drives. The SATA drive is not being detected. It detects the CD-ROM player. It detects the floppy disks. It detects the keyboard, the mouse, since it's a PS2 mouse, the network adapter, the COM ports, the processor of course. It detects one of the sound card. This system is built for a various period of time ranges, so you can play the oldest DOS games, but it can also play Crysis. So I have two sound cards in there, that means we still miss one. We have most of the chipset installed, but these drivers will be older, so it does have AGP support out of the box on XP, but it's going to be a slower version. And like I said, one hard drive is missing, so we're not having every driver. And we have full USB support. So with that out of the way, there's a couple things we need to still install. Those are the Ethernet controller for the networking, the audio controller, the video controller, the PCI input device, which is the game port controller on the sound card, the RAID controller, and the graphics card. Now, because this is one of the first videos that I make, I hope you don't mind the shaky cam. I don't have a stand. But let's dig in. So here is the Hyperion Pro driver. This is a modified chipset driver that I made. Now in XP it's not very modified, but what normally is possible that's not possible with the stock driver is it has the sound card integrated, which this machine doesn't need. So on this machine we're just installing the 5.14 driver unmodified. If you were to install Windows 98 with this driver, you would get everything working even on older systems, despite the 5.14 driver dropping a few. I've modded those back in. So for example, the HP Thin clients, if you use it for that, it will pick up everything in the Thin client, including the sound card. So if you are interested in this driver, there's a link to all the drivers in this video in the description. And for now, we're going to install a whole bunch. So the chipset, AGP, the SATA drivers, and the RAID driver. This driver is very smooth in installation and it will just install. It doesn't error out. It's not as sensitive to IDE bugs from Windows 98. So all in all, this is the best VIA driver that I managed to find/create. And yes, because this is a modded driver installation video, I'll also be commenting on the drivers, what I think of them, what I think the benefits are, why I chose to use them. And in doing so, you will get to see a little bit of this Retro Gaming PC. I'll also turn on the speakers real quick, as we'll be needing later. So here's the boot up. Now, because this is the theme of the build, I actually have multiple operating systems installed. Amiga Linux didn't work out for me yet, so I don't know what I'm going to install there. It's probably going to be something like Knoppix. But it runs Windows 7 or 10 fine, as long as with Windows 10 it's the 32-bit version. Windows 7 can be 64-bit. XP runs fine, 98 runs fine, and DOS runs fine. But for this video we're sticking to Windows XP. If you are interested in seeing a driver installation video of, for example, Windows 98, then I'd happily oblige. Same for Windows 7, but for Windows 7 there's only one driver to install, so there's not that much interesting content there, other than the sound card driver. So now we're back at the desktop, and we now have better chipset support. Up next, we are going to install the graphics card driver. This is a modded graphics driver, just for the sake that I always find them interesting. I'm not entirely sure what the benefit of this specific one was and why I picked it. The reason I picked this specific version is because it will work fantastic in Half-Life 2. It's one of the faster drivers I have tested there, and it also has great image quality. Newer Nvidia drivers, despite them being compatible with this system, will cause issues in some games. For example, in Half-Life 2, if you install the retail version of it, like the original DVD version that has a high frame rate on this system, then the textures are missing. So if you're used to those builds missing textures, that was actually not the case. That's not a game bug, that's a driver bug. And the driver bug gets fixed in later versions of the game, but these older drivers don't have them. Doesn't mean the driver is entirely problem-free for me. I tried Rise of Nations yesterday, and the render order of that game is wrong. But instead of fixing that by switching to yet another driver, I decided to play that one on Windows 7 since it works fine on the driver I used there. So maybe I end up switching the driver out in the end, but for now this is the driver that I settled with. It's also one of the newer modded drivers you can find. It does have an installation bug, however, which we'll have to sort. So what's going to happen is we are going to successfully install the driver, but some components will not be completely installed. I do not know why that is, but I know that once we have rebooted, we'll have to install it one more time in order to get NView to be picked up. So immediate resolution change, which I always find a little surprising in Windows XP because I'm used to having to reboot for them. So now that we are done here, it hasn't asked for a reboot, so let's just immediately go for it. The driver is now in the start menu, which is one of the things that I like about these modded drivers. And if you're curious, like, what's so modded about them, it's really only the default settings that they ship with. They tend to have a little bit more settings unlocked, better defaults for your games. Other than that, not much is different. With, of course, the install experience dumping the installer on the hard drive so you can always access it. That's one of the primary benefits for me, that when I'm swapping between drivers I can always easily go back to the one that I know and love. So now it did ask for the reboot. Unless I just instinctively clicked it through earlier and we didn't end up rebooting. But we are rebooting now. And because I installed it twice, it should be automatically picked up. So going back to XP. In real life, the colors of the monitor are accurate. It's mostly just the camera saturation that's screwing with it. Here we are, back to the desktop. So it's time for the next one. Up next, we're going to install the network driver. Now, the network driver is the only unmodified driver in this video, so it's also going to be the least interesting. This particular driver is a driver that works both on 98 and XP. I prefer that over the newer ones because I haven't run into any problems with it. in newer versions of Windows, the network driver is just included by default. So this is really the only driver you'll ever need for a Marvel Yukon, which to me is a fantastic network card, because this specific network chip, if you're shopping for motherboards and it has one of these, be happy, because this works in DOS all the way up to Windows 10, and it works at gigabyte speeds. Now in Windows XP I'm not getting maximum speeds. One thing that helps with that is my warp speed file. These has some changes for the parameters of TCP/IP to make it slightly faster. So we're going to install that as well. But in Windows 7 and Vista, you will get gigabyte speeds, just like any other network adapter. While at the same time, this thing can support IPX in DOS. So it supports everything that I need, and that makes this a fantastic network chip for this project, because the aim of this project is to cover as many eras as possible. Up next is the Sound Blaster Odyssey. Now I have an Odyssey 1. The reason I went for the 1 is because it has a sound mixer program for DOS that lets me pass through the other sound card without needing the whole driver of this sound card loaded, and for the Odyssey 2 that was not available. That doesn't mean that I want to use the Odyssey 1 driver. I like the benefits like EAX4 and the newer utilities. So I have this PAX 2005 driver here, which is an unofficial one, and I think this driver is also particularly interesting, because if we click through this, you have support for the Odyssey series card, we have the notebook series, and it even works on your Live. So if you have a Sound Blaster Live, you can actually use the Odyssey 2 driver if you're using it for Windows XP. This driver unfortunately does not work on 98. For 98 I use the official driver. So up next we're installing the driver, and we keep clicking through the packages. So I go with all the defaults, and what it's now doing is it's going to extract the Odyssey 2 installation disk to the C drive. So I don't need to burn a CD for this. The driver installer and the whole auto run stuff will all be extracted by this little package. And it's also going to clean them up afterwards, so you don't leave any unnecessary install packages laying around your system. So I personally really love it. I think this is the second coolest driver installation in this whole system. And for a very good reason, I'm saving the absolute coolest driver installation you'll probably ever have seen for the very last, because of a reason you will soon see. Like, we need all the other drivers first before we can reliably install that. So here is the Creative Suite. Because the sound card's not working, you of course don't hear anything yet. And here's the official auto run program. Now personally, some people might not like the bloatware. I do like the bloatware, like showing off how these things were intended to be installed. So I'm going to install all the bloatware along with it, so you can see what kind of packages it would ship with. So in my case, I'm doing the full installation. And I mostly use it with headphones, and if I don't use it with headphones, I can't really hear the difference. So we're doing headphone mode. And with that, we are now in the modified Odyssey 2 installer. Again, if you want any of these drivers, there's a link in the description to my web storage. You can get all of the drivers I used for this project on that link, including all these modified drivers like this one. And if you are looking for the original Odyssey 1 driver that doesn't need a CD, I have a repack on there as well for the Windows 98 install. If you're interested in seeing the 98 install, let me know, or check my channel if I already uploaded it. So this should be picking up both the sound card and the game input device. Sound card also has a FireWire port, but that one is automatically picked up by Windows itself. Now we get the WDM prompt, because after all this is a modified driver that includes the Ology1, so we're going to accept. Zoom in a little so you can read what it's actually trying to install. So it's installing the Windows drivers. In the system files. And then finally we are done, so we're back in this installer. Now we have the media source media player, which, like I said, I like all the bloatware from this, so we're going to have that installed as well. This installer is unmodified, as you can see. It will also install on any computer, so even if you don't have a creative, if you like this particular player, you can use this driver to install it. Personally, I don't like it over the Windows Media Player that is in Windows XP, but I do find it a really nice addition for Windows 98. In Windows 98 you don't get this particular player, you get a different one, but it's better than the default media player that Windows 98 ships with. You can of course also install Windows Media Player 9 on Windows 98, so it's really a matter of preference. So now that both are installed, we can click next, and then we can click exit. And very important, we're not going to reboot the system because we're not done yet. So that installs the Ology ZS driver. Now we have more options. So we can update the media source, we can update the EAX console stuff, the smart recorder, and the mini disk sensor. So now we get some of the Ology 4 drivers and updates on here. So we're going to click next. It's going to launch the media source installer again. All of these, as you saw, were optional. It's also the only driver that I found that has the old media center stuff on here, like the old control panel alongside with all the new stuff. The only downside is the half of the control panel is in Chinese. So I don't particularly like that one on Windows XP. And there's no need to use it because all the options that I really want are already here, other than the one reason that it listed that I don't need. But if you do want it, you could have clicked the checkbox and it would have done that. So here's the EAX console skin. And then there is the smart recorder. And the mini disk center. So now it is deleting the files. This is deleting all the installation disk that it dumped before, leaving your system nice and clean with only the drivers installed. Another thing it does is it dumps that audio control panel, which also has some settings that you might otherwise not have access to. So now we are going to reboot the computer. And as you can hear, the sound is already working. The camera really doesn't like the saturation of this logo. We are now back with sound and a little bit of a hiccup because it's still installing stuff. The installation unfortunately is blocked by the welcome screen. And And here we go. So now we have this little media source shortcut bar up there, so we can easily modify sound fonts, EAX, etc. Another interesting thing it does, it replaces the sound button. I have no idea why, because the one in Windows is fine, but they really like to aggressively brand your system. And personally, I just find that cute. I think it's fun that they were so aggressive with it back in the day, so I like showing that off. Obviously, if you don't like that at all, then you install the driver in a minimal mode, or you just download the latest driver from the internet that isn't one of these modded ones, and it will just give you all the new features because it's a new driver, but without any of the bloatware. So depending on which kind of experience you like more, you can do the official latest driver, or you can do one of these modded drivers that installs it as if it had been the CD. That leaves only one more driver, and I saved the absolute best for last. This is, I think, the most interesting driver installation that I've ever seen. It is the Voodoo 2 for Windows XP driver. Now, this driver doesn't have a functional setup. I tried rigging a setup.exe in there, so in the zip file, if you download it from my website, there is a setup.exe, but it doesn't work because I failed and I never removed it. So this thing doesn't have a setup installer. Well, it does, but it's not meant to install the driver. Instead, we have to add it through the device manager like your original Voodoo 2 driver on Windows 98. Now, I don't know of a Voodoo 2 driver for Windows 98 that's official, so this is not the official driver, as you may have guessed. Instead, it's something really, really cool. So we have one device left, which is the multimedia video controller. We're not going to do this from Windows Update. Instead, we are going to install this from a specific location. And we're going to map out the Voodoo 2 folder on the desktop here. So, when you're ready, watch this. The most interesting driver installation of all time, at least as far as I have seen. We are now installing the driver. Of course, an unofficial driver, so we get this message. And here it goes. It's now being installed. Come on, focus. There we go. And here we are. Have you ever seen a driver installation with a correct row? Turn the sound down a little bit before people get annoyed by my bass. I hope you can still hear it. But yeah, if you haven't guessed, this is why we did the graphics card and audio driver first, otherwise you would have missed this entire experience. and with that I'm gonna press enter. You could of course skip the entire thing if you wanted to, you don't have to watch the entire thing. And now we're in this Voodoo 2 Voodoo Mage installation program. So we're gonna click next and finish, and then close that, and then we get into this whole graphical interface. So we can press a key, and now we're in the Voodoo Mage configuration utility, which is a graphical way of managing all your Voodoo settings during the installation time, but also later, because it adds this to your desktop. So for Glide, I am going to leave everything on default. For OpenGL, we leave everything default as well. Same for Direct 3D, because I already have, of course, the Nvidia card, which is way better, so we want to use that as much as possible. The Voodoo 2 is really only for games that don't work well on my Nvidia card. Here is the current settings. I leave it on stability. It doesn't really pick this up. There we go. So these are all the settings for the stability profile. I'm gonna go back out and save and exit. Now there's two more things we need to do, because there's two issues with the Voodoo card. So first, of course, we wait until the installer is done. So it also installs the overclock property page. And that's it. Now everything is installed, but there's two problems with the Voodoo 2. First of all, this is a fast system, so it's gonna overheat. So what we want to do, that's not possible in the graphical thing, it's only possible here, is I'm gonna slide this all the way down. It's still more than fast enough for what I need, but with this clock speed, it's not going to overheat in the system. So we're leaving everything on default. Now there's one more thing we still need to do, and that's the Voodoo 2 logo crashes on startup. And even though in the interface menu you just saw it was set to disabled, it actually isn't. That's a bug in their program. So I'm going to quickly navigate to the Microsoft folder and then Windows, current version, and run. And then we are going to grab this and delete it. And now the whole system is installed. So I hope you enjoyed that one, because to me there aren't any driver installations like this. It's the first time I've seen them with the cracked row and with copying the Audigy disk to the local disk with those repacks. So I hope you found this interesting. If you want to see the 98 installation on this system, I can do that as well. In that case, I will show the whole installation, because the installation doesn't take as long and it's a modified way of installing 98, because I'm installing it over a USB stick. So if you want to see it there with mostly stock drivers, but a more interesting install method, let me know, or check the channel if I already uploaded such a thing. And for now, I wish you a very nice day. Bye bye.